I'm Olivia Dade.
And I am Emma Berry.
And yeah, we're going to chat with one another.
We're going to do this interview, and hopefully that we will learn something about ourselves. We are good friends, it's in real life, it's important. But context for people to know, this is not like the first time we've met. And we're going to interview one another and just chat about our books and our work and our process and where ideas come from and that kind of thing.
And particularly the places where my work intersects with Emma's work. And I do think there are pretty significant places where that's true.
Yes.
Which I don't think is entirely surprising, being good friends.
Yeah, I mean, I guess not to get off our questions, but I think that is an interesting question. You know, writer friends with whom you feel like there is commonality with your work, and then writer friends where you're friends, but there's not commonality with your work. But I think with ours, there is commonality.
Yeah, a lot of it.
Yeah.
And I actually think I mentioned you several times in my interview with Ruby. Which means at least one person will be watching.
Yeah, it's really built-in audience.
And we are actually filming this in my mom's house. And so my family is off in the distance. So if you hear a ruckus, it includes my 9-year-old and my husband, who's chatty. so he's super chatty. So if you hear something, that's what that is.
Yeah.
So we have some, just like we did with Ruby, we have some sort of overarching questions that will take longer to answer. And then we have some lightning round questions, which when I asked for some a month or two ago, people supplied, and we are focusing on ones that I did not answer with Ruby. Okay?
Excellent.
All right, so the first question that we want to talk about was, which project of ours had been the most significant craft challenge or risk, and why was it such a risk, and sort of how did you address that challenge?
Yeah. Do you want me to go first?
You can go first.
Okay, excellent. I think probably the book that was the biggest risk of mine, a story that was the biggest risk of mine, was a story that I wrote called Free. And it is a motorcycle romance and kind of new adult, and there's also, it's a little bit of romantic suspense. And I wrote it in a year when everything in my life seemed just, it was hearing no over and over again. I had book projects that were rejected. I was on the job market, I was not getting jobs, and just, it was like all of this stuff was just sort of crumbling. And so I started writing this project, and I started writing it in first person, which I had never written first person at that point and haven't written it since. It's not a voice that I fit into, and it's also like a motorcycle romantic suspense, which at that point I'd been writing these like political contemporary romances, which were very like esoteric and like very intellectual and also urban sad. Like it was just, in all of these ways, it was not fitting in with that. And I wrote it thinking I would never, ever, ever sell it. It would never, ever see the light of day. I just needed to write like this palate cleanser. So I wrote this story, or most of the story. I guess it wasn't actually even finished because I didn't think anyone would have any interest in it. And then I ended up having these conversations with Judith from Open Ink Press, and ended up conceiving of with her this anthology in which the stories wouldn't have names on them. So like there'd be names on the cover of the book, but there wouldn't be names in the individual stories. And then people could try and sort of guess who had written what. And it ended up being like the perfect project for that, because everybody who was participating in that anthology was taking a risk. We were all writing outside of our genre, and the book itself, or the anthology itself, was itself kind of a challenge to the audience. You know, how do you make sense out of a work when you don't know who wrote it, and do you want to, and is that author promising a big part of that? So I think that was a challenge for me in terms of the point of view. It was a challenge in terms of the setting, it was a challenge in terms of the subject matter, but it ended up being the thing that I needed to kind of turn the page on a period when kind of none of my other plans had been sort of working out.
Was the process of actually writing it hard for you?
No, and which is funny because I normally am a writer who's like very tortured in terms of drafting. Like I love revision, but I hate writing books, which is a silly thing for a writer for that to be true. But writing that book was actually really easy. Now, evaluating what I wrote was really hard, because normally when stuff is more in my normal voice, you have more of like a sort of floor for knowing, does this sound like me, and sort of always going back to that question. Here I was trying not to sound like me, and so those kinds of normal ways that I know if something is good or not, or if I'm satisfied with something or not, just weren't obvious. Like it just didn't work to evaluate that project.
I remember beta reading that.
Yeah, I think that's actually the first thing of mine you ever beta read, and which is like, it's really weird for me in so many ways, and like doesn't fit with kind of the other stuff I've written at all.
Right. It was still, I mean, still a great story.
Thank you.
Just, different from what
Very
you
different.
typically write.
Yeah.
Like when I think Emma Berry, I don't necessarily think motorcycle club.
Yeah, but it's like, but it has like a beta hero.
No.
Like he's
No,
not
it
in the
totally-
motorcycle club. It's basically about
he's
like
an accountant, right?
He's an accountant. Yeah.
Which is totally you. And it's also very grounded in detail about location and about the work. And like, it feels very... Yeah, it's grounded in detail, which is something that I love about your work, and that is very clear even in a story that is not your, what would seem to be your typical story.
Yes,
So
I think that's fair.
So you're in there. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just a different sort of packaging.
Yes, very, very different packaging.
Yeah.
So what about you? What is the work of yours that you feel like was the biggest challenge or the biggest risk, and how did you deal with that challenge and risk?
I talked about this a little bit with Ruby, but I do think is probably legitimately the answer to this question, which was my Rogue anthology, Rogue Act story, Cover Me. In part because one thing that Ruby and I discussed is that humor can often be a crutch, and I was not clear going in that anyone would want to read my writing if there was no humor in it.
Yeah.
Because basically that means that you're relying just on in this case, emotion. The writing is a craft, but also my ability to evoke emotion and to talk about a serious situation seriously.
Yeah.
And that was not something that I had tried to do before. And I was, to that point, I don't think I was clear that anyone would want to read my writing if it was not funny.
Which isn't true, of course. But I remember when you were writing it, I was talking about that, and you'd be like, it's not funny, I'm not sure. And I was like, funny is part of what people love about your books, but I don't know that it's all what people love about your books.
Right, you were very supportive about that. And also I just wanted to do justice to the story because, breast cancer within my family, both my grandmothers had breast cancer. One grandmother died of it. The other grandmother had a mastectomy and survived only to die later of lung cancer. But so it's within our family. It's something that scares our family, given that it's on both sides. And so I wanted to do justice by that. Healthcare is something that I am probably one of the political issues I'm most passionate about, clearly. And also I think it was a challenge because then I was trying to fit this story with all this emotion into 18,000 words, which was actually more than we were supposed to write. But I was like, even that, I was going through it. It felt a lot less loosey-goosey than some of my drafts because I had to be very careful about what I could actually show on the page versus what I had to say, this happened. Basically trying to summarize in a few paragraphs what had occurred off the page. Where typically in a longer book I would have just written those scenes. I had to sort of, in some cases I tried to summarize things and then I decided, no, that has to be on the page. And then other things I wrote and like, no, I can sum that up. So it was sort of that book felt much more meticulous in sort of word use and meticulous in terms of trying to be very careful about word limitations and space. So yeah, and a lot of it was just me. How I got through it was, trying to make careful choices about what I was doing, and then again whining to my friends about being like, I don't know. And
she wasn't whining.
I sent the first chapter, I think, to you, and I sent the first chapter to Cecilia Grant, and I just said, does this seem like I'm on the right path here? Because it's a scene where she's getting a mammogram. The hero's not even, it's an 18,000 word novella, and the hero wasn't even in the first, the male main character was not even in the first chapter.
But it's not like they know each other really well, which I think works. I want to ask though, do you think that the limitation and focusing on the limitation and having to be really judicious in terms of what you chose to dramatize in the story, do you think that those things distracting you helped you work in other ways? Or in other words, like focusing on the rules, did it free you up creatively, or did focusing on the rules limit you?
I think in this case it felt like the writing of this story, despite my doubts, actually went relatively easily. I felt a lot of clarity while I was writing the story in a way that I often don't. I think because I did know what I wanted to accomplish, the question was how to accomplish it within a short stretch of time.
Yeah.
And using, and respectfully. You know, with respect for the subject matter and the women in my family, the people around the world struggling with similar issues. So, I mean, in this case, I think that it probably helped me be my best. I think in other cases it would be, because I was clear on what I wanted to do, it was fine. I think in other circumstances it might have made me freeze. So, in this case.
That's interesting. Okay.
So another thing that we have in common, although you have more of it than I do, is we're both coming from a bit of an academic background. So you have...
I have a master's degree in English and a PhD in American Studies.
Right. And I have a master's degree in American history, specializing in American colonial history, and was in a doctoral program, but then I fled.
Which was smart. That was super smart. Anyone who's a doctoral program listening to this, run away now.
So one thing I thought would be an interesting sort of intersection between the two of us is how we feel like our academic background influences our writing. So.
Yeah. Okay, so we were coming up with this list of questions, and this was one of the ones that ended up on the list, and I started thinking about that, and I think it influences it in a lot of ways. And I'll hold the work question until we get to that, but I think just to put this here, like, my tortured relationship with my academic background has been one of the reasons that I write so much about people's work lives, and often their work lives and stuff is like not going great. And I started writing fiction while not writing my dissertation. And so I was really, it's true, it's totally true, but I was totally blocked and could not write this thing that I was supposed to be writing, but knew that I had to write. I said, gotta be butt in chair, and so I started writing other stuff, and that was where the first novel came out of that. And I know a lot of people that's true of, where like we know we have to work, but sometimes you just can't do this, so you do this other thing instead, which doesn't have any rules and doesn't have any limits and gets to be fun and that. So I think that's part of where it comes from for me, is like writing for me is a release. At least I hope it is. When it's going well, it is, because it's not this serious day job thing that I'm supposed to be doing. Part of it, I think, also is how you manage an archive, and that's what I was thinking about when we were talking about the question, is that my dissertation research started going better when, after spending a long time reading microfilm, which is what I spent years staring at a microfilm machine, at the end of the day, I would start writing these narrative notes. And I would just write, today I was reading, this, and here's what I was thinking about, and here's the questions that I was writing. And when I get stuck and I can't write the fiction, I often also have a meta document going on. And so I'll be like, today I was working on chapter 4, and here's what I think was working in chapter 4, and here's what I think sucks about chapter 4, and here's how I think I'm going to fix that problem. And I have this kind of narrative meta thing. And I also started putting questions there. So like, if I know I need to go back in revision and fix this, but I don't know how to fix it now, and just being able to like unload my brain into this other document helps me sometimes work out the problems in the thing I'm really supposed to be writing. And so that was my dissertation director told me to do that, and she was totally right, and it helped that project, but I think has also helped the fiction writing as well. So I think that's part of it. But I think, yeah, I'm curious what you're going to say about the academic question, and then maybe I'll have more thoughts.
Right. I mean, I think in greater and lesser ways, it actually really does influence my writing. I had to fight when I first started writing to make my writing less academic, and also more. One thing I've worked is to become better at descriptive language, because I just didn't have a ton of practice with descriptive language.
Yeah.
I think I was considered a pretty good writer within our graduate program, a very clean writer, but
she's very, very clean writer. It's annoying, actually. Make more typos.
but it's a different type of writing, very much so. So I really had to beat out of myself the tendency to use furthermore and fundamentally
complicated.
However, a lot of semicolons I had to get rid of. And also, but even in academic writing, they did not. I had some professors who were very intent that the writing be good as well, so they did not want us to use passive verbs. They did not want to see is, the verb to be. So, I mean, and actually I've had to train myself to be willing to use was or something like that, when sometimes it's just the most effective way to get something across. Not like she proves to be, where I'm trying to make little tricks not to use was, and then I'm like, no, just
say was.
Just say was. I think that, my background, again, historian, is that one thing I found when we were reading, history, is that there are some occasions when an incident occurs, a historical incident occurs, where it's very clear, like, who's the righteous side.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you have, it's very clear to me, Civil War, the Confederacy is the wrong side.
Yeah.
The Nazis are the wrong side. There are, Andrew Jackson is a dick. There are things to me that are very clear. And then, but there are a lot of incidents in history. Like if you look at the American Revolution, which was my time period, and also I worked at Colonial Williamsburg, is that one thing I found intriguing, of course, is that you can also look at the British perspective about what was happening. And rah, American freedom, give me liberty or give me death. But there's also the British perspective of, we are protecting you on your borders. We don't want you to expand further west because you're intruding upon Native American populations out there. We do not, so we're going to put the proclamation line of 1763, and you're not supposed to move past that. And that is actually one of the real matches that lights what eventually becomes the American Revolution, that people, American settlers, colonists, are angry that they can't keep pushing Native Americans out of their land, and the British are stopping them from doing it. And so that is far on that one. I think, in retrospect, obviously the American colonists were on the wrong side of that one. And so there are, as a historian, one thing that I sort of learned to do is try to understand the perspectives on all sides of an issue. So when I write characters, I try, but don't always succeed, but I try to write characters where even if, in most cases, that even if they do things that I don't agree with, do you understand why they're doing them?
Yeah. Yep, history requires, and I think we do have a disciplinary shift, because I really am a literature person, and even though my PhD is in something else, like I really come at it from a perspective where I'm interested in culture, not just in history per se. But I think that radical empathy for everybody that you are talking about, you can't write well as an academic without that. And I think that definitely makes one a better novelist. And I think also that sense that everything we're doing as academics is storytelling, and that even when you are really, really convinced by your argument, you always have to remember it's an argument. And like, we're not Sherlock Holmes, we're not detectives, we can't prove things absolutely. All we can do is suggest it seems more likely that this person's motives were X than that they were Y.
And as a historian, you could almost never say always, never, that these are things that very few things always happen, very few things never happen, that there are a panoply of possibilities. Another thing for me, I think, is at some point when I was talking to my advisor, when I was finishing up my master's, she said, well, what do you really want to write about? And my answer to her, and I still remember this, and I was like, 23, was I said, sex, sin, and the body. And that is not entirely detached from what I'm doing now.
Does she know about what you do now?
She passed away
a
few years after I left. So she does not. I have another one of my close professors who is somewhat befuddled by the whole thing, because he's very much an academic. In a very wonderful but also not so wonderful sense. And the other thing I would say is, when I wrote my master's thesis, it was about one woman in particular, like Eliza Lucas Pinckney. And the chapter that my advisor, and actually this other gentleman who helped me, thought was by far the strongest was the chapter about her marriage. And she was in love with him, I think, pretty clearly for a long time, and he was married to someone else, to the point where in her journal she accidentally wrote her last name as his last name before his wife was gone. But it was like, and she clearly like really adored him and was lost when he died after they got married. And it was, I mean, they said this is by far your strongest chapter, and it was about the love interest. It's about the relationship. And the other thing I would say briefly, again, I'm rambling, is that a lot of my books discuss having to restart your professional life. And having to deal with a sense of like deep failure over your professional life, and sort of how, I had decided to become an academic in 7th grade. I took a college class at William & Mary in 7th grade, and I was like, I want to do that,
Yeah.
what the professor was doing. And so, I just never deviated from that. So for me to leave graduate school, short of the PhD and the doctorate, I was just lost. And my life essentially started over in that moment. And it was not in a great, like, rah, rah, my life is starting over. It was like this deep sense of shame and failure. Even though I'd made the decision, I wasn't kicked out, but I decided to go. And so I think it is not necessarily coincidental that a lot of my books feature characters who are dealing with a deep sense of failure, but also having to completely rebuild their professional lives a lot of the time.
I think we should segue to the work question, because
Yes.
the thing that I have to say about that I think is very much related. That's what we're going to skip ahead in our questions here. Or I guess we're not skipping ahead, but just how work is thematically important to what we're doing, and why it's the problem we keep returning to. And what you just said, it resonates with me so very much. I didn't go straight into grad school, so I had another job in politics first, and I was really torn. I didn't know whether I wanted to be a professor or go to law school and be, Josh Lyman, from the West Wing kind of a character. But by the time I committed to that, by the time I saw some more things about the world and was like, no, this is bad, and I don't care about making money, like, I'm going to be an academic, and the ivory tower will be great, and it'll avoid all this stuff that I've come to not like about the world. And then I was in grad school, and I was like, oh no, like, academics is all of those things turned up to 11. But I think that you drink that Kool-Aid, so to speak, so deeply, and you identify with your work to a really strong extent. And when I finished and then went on the market and didn't get a real academic job, it was crushing. Yeah. And even though I was able to intellectualize it and say, like, you're being silly, and I like, this is just the market and it's not you, even though I knew all those things intellectually, it didn't change how I felt. And so I think in my books, in terms of work, people are often over-identifying with their work, and either that has failed in some way. In sort of my earlier books, people were always experiencing like a sense of failure or problem. In the later books, it doesn't mean so much that, but people over-identifying with it and then trying to like rejigger their relationship to work into a way that's more healthy. I also have found that work can be a great way to show character and to show conflict. And I know that there are readers who are not enamored of chapters spent on the job and really want the book to be more focused on the romance. And I completely understand that. I think for me, it's become a great way to show who people are outside of the romance itself, or in concert with the romance.
I mean, that makes total sense to me. Mm-hmm. For me, a lot of my jobs have been all-encompassing in one way or another. A lot of my work. As a graduate student, you're never really, there's always something more you should be working on. Yeah. So when you take, I will not say you, even when I was not officially working, I was continually guilty that I was not working. Yeah. So it didn't feel like time off, really. Yeah. It was either guilt or working. Yeah. And not much in between. Yeah. And then I left and I worked at Colonial Williamsburg, and in one sense, it was different because you leave at the end of the day and you're done. Yeah. However, Colonial Williamsburg is incredibly incestuous in the sense that people who work there, particularly, I would say, younger people who didn't have families, and at the time, that was me, they hang out together after hours. This is their friend group. They date each other. They sleep with each other. And you spend a lot of time in the break rooms together, particularly if you're someone who gives tours, because you have that really super on time. And then you have time, at the time where I worked there at least, you had a significant amount of downtime afterwards to sort of regroup before you had your next tour. But that means that you're often spending a lot of time with people. So that even though it wasn't all-encompassing in the same work sense, it was all-encompassing in the sense that a good chunk of your identity is based on this circle of people and this setting. And then teaching, I was working 70, 80 hours a week. Yeah. So that was all-encompassing. And then, so I think, and I'm not saying any of this is healthy. I'm just saying that I tend to be sort of a very all-or-nothing person, which is something that I am also having to try to rejigger in my own life with limited success to try to have a healthier relationship with my work. But I grew up very much defining myself by academics, my work, what my brain could do. Yep. And so it is not work in my books is often, not always, but often central to my characters because it's been central to my life and most of my work, and it's been central to my self-image.
Yeah.
And in ways that, again, I'm not recommending for the general public.
Yeah.
But it's true. So I think that's one of the things I love about your writing is that not only it's so grounded in detail, but often grounded in work in a way that feels very familiar to me and the way I've experienced my life and my world.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. I think that I think there's a certain type of character for whom that makes a lot of sense. And I've thought about this kind of type A, sort of driven character. And I've thought, like, you should write a character who's different. And every time I sit down to write a project, I'm like, this is it. This is the project where, like, there are not going to be a lot of work scenes. I've done it. And then I read the draft, I'm like, oh, heck, I did not do it. Like, because it always, like, creeps back in. I don't think I could stop doing that if I had to.
No, I've said to myself, this is not about work, but you need to write a male main character who is not super into the female main character from the beginning. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, I can't. It's intrinsic to your voice, I think, and in a way that would be not true to you to not write it that way. And I think for me, the semicolons and the slightly more academic language and the obsession with work are just really intrinsic to what I do. I mean, even when I write a motorcycle club book, like, I can't get away from it.
Yes.
So, like, you can't cross your voice like that. I think.
Yeah.
You can't cross the streets.
Yes. So one question that Emma came up with, which I thought was very interesting, was she said, we're talking about our different ways to come into romance as a genre, about when we started reading romance and how we think our history with romance, whether it's limited or lifelong, sort of influences what we write.
Yeah. So I started reading romance right after I have twins who are now 8 years old, and I started reading romance about 2 weeks or 3 weeks after they were born, and I got a Kindle for Christmas.
What a coincidence!
Yeah, and so there I was, and they were on, like, a 2-hour feeding schedule because they were small, and so, like, every 2 hours they had to eat, and I was sleeping about 3 hours a day, not together, like 3 hours like split up, and my brain would not function, but it also wouldn't calm down. Like, when I did have time to rest, I just couldn't get myself to rest. And my advisor came over to see the kids, and she mentioned she was teaching this class on women's popular fiction, and she was teaching a romance novel, and said it in, I would not say like a completely dismissive way, but maybe a sort of dismissive way. And in my head, I was like, romance novel, I should read one of those. Like, and that was exactly the way that I phrased it in my head. I'm going to read one. So I literally, because I'm a dork, like, I Google, like, what is the best romance novel ever? And I find the list on AAR, like, their annual list. This would have been about 2010, give or take. It might have, or I guess this was 2011, so it might have been the 2010 list. And so Lord of Scoundrels is the top of the list. So I buy Lord of Scoundrels, and I'm 28 at this point, so I was in my late 20s. And I read this book, and I loved it. And it's a problematic book, and there's a lot we could talk about, limitations and why I don't think that's necessarily the best romance, but that was my first romance. And then I read about 100 of them. I found them restorative in a way that other reading was not. And at that moment, when I desperately needed to give my brain a break, and when I needed something that was about pleasure in the reading experience, romance was providing that in a way that absolutely nothing else was. And it also felt like finally. It felt like all of this other reading I'd been doing my whole life that was not explicitly genre romance, I realized I'd been reading for the romances. And so it was like, suddenly here was this genre that provided just that like took all this other stuff out of the book and stripped it away that I didn't really want and just gave me what I wanted. And it felt like, why did I wait so long to read this? I guess because I didn't know it was out there. So at this point I've been reading romance, 8 years, almost 9 years. So I wouldn't say I'm a newbie to it, but relative to someone who's been reading it her whole life, I am a bit of a newbie to it. And I think in some ways I'm jealous. Like, I love reading the Help a Bitch Out columns on Smart Bitches, and I adore it when someone can identify the book in like 2 minutes. And I want to be one of those people. I think my goal in life is to solve a Help a Bitch Out, but I'll never be able to do it. I think because I don't have that 30 years or 40 years of romance reading experience. I'm jealous of people who do.
Now, do you think it influences your writing in any way, that you came to it a little bit later?
Maybe. I think what influences my writing is that I never really read category. So I think if I'd started reading it sooner when the genre was different, when category had more muscle and when there weren't as much single title, I think I would have read different books. And so I think that shapes it a little bit. I also, other than that sort of first year of my kid's life when I was reading more or less exclusively romance until I was back in grad school full time, at this point, romance is probably the majority of my reading, or it's certainly a big portion of it, but I read a lot of other stuff. And so I think if it had been all romance all the time, I think I would write a little differently, but I can't say how necessarily.
It's a counterfactual argument,
exactly.
So it's no way to
to prove the opposite of it. Yeah.
Yeah. As Emma indicated, I honestly don't remember the first romance I read because, as I've said before, my mom had a pile inside her. They had a little, like not a huge walk-in closet, but a little walk-in closet. It was off to the left. And yeah, when they leave the house, I'd read. And I remember sitting there long enough that my foot fell asleep. I would sit cross-legged and my foot would fall asleep. And it was the 80s, and I was probably started when I was 6 or 7. I mean, and I didn't understand a lot of it. And there was some pretty problematic content in some of it. She had mostly historicals, but she did have some series like Candlelight Ecstasy, because there were all these, if you've been in romance for a while, they had Love Swept back when it was Bantam Love Swept. Yeah. They had Candlelight Ecstasy romance. There was Silhouette. There was Harlequin as well. And I read all of those. And in fact, from the time I was 15, I started working part-time at a used bookstore where I was the romance expert, and we got in a ton of series and mass market single title romance. And my boss, Kelsey, hi Kelsey, I mean, she was only 10 years older than me, so and she started this business. I was her first employee, and she knew that I wasn't gonna screw her over. She told me I could bring home as many books as I wanted, just make sure, bring back, probably about an equal amount. But she's like, take home. I had bags. If I was not working on my schoolwork, I was reading romances. So I literally don't remember a time where I wasn't. I think that apart from my sheer contrariness, which drives a lot of what I do, but I think that's part of the reason I haven't and don't read a lot of craft books, because I think the rhythms and the beats of a romance have been there almost since I first started.
Yeah, in your blood.
Now you may read my books and argue, read a crafts book.
Never.
I'm not claiming that there is not room for improvement. I am simply saying that a part of me felt like that I sort of understood the basic arc of how things should look. Yeah. And for instance, how dialogue looks and how all of those things were sort of with me from the beginning. I think I also had a greater sense maybe of what sort of stories maybe appealed to me, because over time it just became clearer that, I mean, looking back at the books that I've kept from that time, I mean, they're almost all heroes. They're not really alpha heroes. Heroes from the time. And it's not necessarily coincidental, the ones that I've kept. Protective, yes.
Yeah.
Caretakers, yes.
Yeah.
Dominating, no.
Yeah. So like your taste was already kind of forming at that point in a way that's remained really consistent.
I think so. The sort of books that I'm writing are not necessarily, they're not things necessarily that I read, but it touches on things that I love. And there are certain emotional beats that at a certain point I realized, like when I reread, and I reread quite a bit, and I used to have thousands of books over time I've gotten rid of a lot of them, bought some of them in ebooks, but the parts that I reread were usually the caretaking parts.
Yes, and there's always a caretaking part in Olivia's books.
And that's the part that I would go through and flip through the book and find those parts. Yeah. It could be emotional, it could be physical, but those were the really powerful parts for me. Yeah. And so at some point I think I realized, first unconsciously, but then consciously, that's what I love, I should include that in... Sorry,
there's some yard work going on outside.
So I mean, I think that's how I would. I honestly don't know how I would write differently if I came to it later. But like, I am very grounded in sort of the. I've read all sorts of romance
Yeah.
from the beginning, and so I think, and I do still read like all subgenres,
Yeah.
and except for inspirational and YA. So
Yeah. One thing I would say, did you think when you were reading those romances as a kid or as an adolescent, was it pretty equal in terms of historical contemporary, more contemporary? What was your balance?
I read mostly contemporary.
Because when I started reading romance, I was mostly reading historical, and I have really no desire to write like British set historical. And that is very curious to me because for that first year, it was so much Dukes and the Ton, and I couldn't or wouldn't want to write those things, even though I read a lot of them and loved a lot of them.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I said I think I probably read I read a lot of traditional Regencies actually because they were shorter. A lot of times I was sneaking books in between my academic work, and so like the single title I did read some of them, but those were harder. The series ones were a little bit easier to try to sneak in.
Yeah.
So a lot of blue stockings and.
That cracks me up.
Yes. Yeah. So revisions. You mentioned earlier that you're a fan of revisions and you do not love drafting. And so the question is, how do you feel about revisions, and does that affect your initial drafting or later writing process in any way?
Yeah, I love revising. I'm much more a reviser than a drafter. And I came to love it for a bunch of reasons, but one is that I feel like I've saved several books in revision that I had first drafts that were really a problem, and that either I figured out how to fix it on my own, or that I got really good editing at some point and then saved a book. And like one of those is Party Lines, which is like the last book in that political series that I wrote. And I remember sending that book to my editor and just being like, I hate it so much. And she was like, take 2 weeks, work on the book, send it back to me. And I did a big revision of my own, and then she had a bunch of really fantastic notes. One of them was, the hero can't be the heroine that early in the book, babe. And so like, and in the book, it's probably my favorite book I've written on my own. And I know that I saved that book in revision. I know that the first draft was not good. And so really, revision, what I tell myself in my head is the first draft can suck. You're going to fix it. That doesn't always work out because I do revise as I draft, which I know is really, really bad, and you shouldn't do that. And
if you read those craft
people, I know, but if you read all the craft books, they'll tell you not to do that. I cannot not do it. Like, just I can't, in part because I'm a very character voice driven writer, and I've tried to become more of a plotter over time. But what plotting has never let me do, and I'm not saying it would never let anyone do, I'm just saying for me, is that I can't figure out the character voice by answering questions like, what's their favorite color and who's their favorite beetle. And people have all these different lists. I mean, I'm giving silly examples. People work through these different lists of questions for characters, and I've done that, but until I write 10,000 or 20,000 words in that character's voice, I don't really understand them. And as a consequence of what I learned writing those words, I often realize that stuff that I wrote early in the book is wrong, or it's not honest for that character, so that it means that I have to go back and fix it. And so I do revise while I write. I like revision so much more than drafting. I sort of feel like people should send me their crappy drafts and I'll fix them or something, because I would rather do that than drafting the book itself. I find it so painful, and I'm also very slow as a writer. So I would much rather revise, and I do love revision.
Yeah, I hate revisions. I hate revisions. I think part of it is just because I'm a worrier, and there's usually a lot of crud going on in my head at any time. And when drafting is going well for me, I'm in a flow state, and all of that just gets wiped away. And that's very, it's pleasurable for me. Like, it really is meaningful to me. And I love that, where you sort of emerge hours later, and you're like, I only half remember what I've written. And like, I have to look back through and be like, oh, like I wrote that. And I enjoy I enjoy seeing what my brain can do without my conscious choice. Like, I have a story arc that tells me what is the point of this chapter, where are we going? But I usually do not fill in the details. Like, I don't know what jokes are going to be in there. I don't necessarily have ahead of time a turn of phrase planned or anything like that. So the rest of it gets filled in by, like, you're creating out of nothing. It's magical to me. I know I sound like I'm 12, but like it is magical to me. I
wish I felt that way. Like what I'm feeling now is envy, not like anything else.
But don't envy me, because then I get down to revisions and like I face them with bitter sulking. But I will say the part of revisions I don't mind. I do revise as I write. I go back usually and read what I have written the previous day and like do some fixes before I move on, because I need a reminder of what I actually wrote. Because sometimes, again, if writing has gone well, I may not clearly remember what I've done, to remind myself what threads I need to pick up and keep moving through the chapter. If I know I've messed something up, I will go back and fix it, because that's just, I have to fix it. Unless it's really minor, I would rather go back and change it so it's not bothering me and then move on. So by the time everything really has kind of gotten revised at least once, and sometimes several times, because if I haven't written for several days, I will go back further to remind myself. And if it's been a week, I will go back to the beginning of the book, and then I will revise as I go a little bit.
I've had to start leaving myself like notes in the margin, and it just like, Emma, you cannot go back beyond this point, because otherwise I will revise the first page over and over and over, and there comes a point when it isn't productive. Like if I feel like I'm making good changes, I'll let myself keep doing it. But sometimes I'll email Genevieve and be like, I'm not allowed to touch those first chapters anymore. Yell at me if I touch the first chapters anymore, because I just have to move on, because it can get not productive.
I mean, for me, my goal in revisions is to get the effect that was needed, the change that is needed, with as few changes as possible to the actual text. So, like, it's the lazy person's method. I'm like, is there a way that I can just shift? I can use some of what I've done and shift some wording, add a paragraph, basically keep as much as I can, you know, and most of the time, it sometimes takes surprisingly little to change the entire tone of a scene. You can keep a lot of stuff. It's rare that I have to completely overhaul. Like in the book I just finished. There was a chapter that Emma read and was like, I think this chapter's off. And like, I overhauled it, but I was actually able to keep a good chunk of it while actually overhauling the problems, I think.
And I think that was a good example of where kind of surgical revision, sort of laparoscopic revision, like worked, without like getting too much into what was going on there. Like, we were concerned about how the male protagonist was kind of like responding to a story the female protagonist was telling. So like, it was just like a few touches to what he said. It was just a few like touch-ups, and then suddenly like it read better, like it addressed what the issue was. I have definitely gone back and done the other version of revision, the like, I'm going to change 40% of the words version of revision, which is really painful. It's deeply painful. If the book is getting better, I think it's worth it. I often feel like everything that people like about my books, I often feel like happens in revision. But like, I think my second version of the joke is almost always better than my first version of the joke. And I don't know, it takes me a while. And like, right now Genevieve and I are sort of sitting on a book that we finished several months ago, but like we're not ready to look at it yet, because I don't know how to sort through what's good and bad. And I think when I am revising what I'm writing, which I'm almost always doing, but that's good when I know what's wrong, and it's not good when I can't yet tell what's wrong. You know, and then it begins to feel just like wheel spinning.
Right. I mean, there are times I have had to overhaul things. I mean, but I am more likely to just throw the whole thing out. If I feel like there's too much that needs to change, I'm more likely just to
And see, for me, I would almost never do that, because the drafting itself is so hard for me, and I am very slow. Like 3,000 words for me is like an insanely good day. I think that you write.
No, that's a pretty good day for me too.
Yeah, that's
maybe not insanely, but it's a good day.
Okay, well, for me that would be like an almost unheard of good day. Like 1,000 words is a more typical good day for me, and I'm not always even writing.
She has a full-time job.
Yeah, no, that's true.
And trans.
Yeah. But regardless, I'm
that
just saying,
changes things.
I am slow. So if you are slow, I understand. I think that's part of why I'm more married to revision, because the words are very precious. Even if I'm going to throw a lot of them out, because I'm not going to write as many of them, you know? So I think that's the difference between us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what sort of factors, we just talked about this, influence your writing pace, and has your writing pace changed over time, and if so, why?
Yeah, I mean, beyond what we just said, I think my writing pace has gone up and down over time. I've had books that I've written fast, that, for me, fast, like 6 weeks, 2 months, that I felt like were good books. Like the second book that I wrote in that political series, wrote really fast. Genevieve and I wrote Earthbound in like a month. And those were good books, and we felt great about them, and it was going well. I've written other books that have been really painful, but that have turned out to be good books. And so I don't feel like there's a close relationship between the speed in which I wrote a book and the quality of the book, ultimately. But yeah, I would say that the work and also I'm very mood-driven writer, and there's times when I am feeling good and I know I have to run to get the book out before I don't feel good about the book anymore, because otherwise that will prevent me from finishing it.
But it hasn't been a change over time. It just depends on circumstances,
yes,
on writing that particular book, and maybe what's happening in your life on a professional and personal level.
Yes, I've still had times, even recently when things have been harder, that I felt like I was writing quickly, or was writing a great number of words, so 30,000 words in a month or something. So it's ebbed and flowed, for sure. It has not been consistent.
Yeah, I think it's sort of a mixture of things for me. When I first started around 2014, I'd left academia at that point 14 years before, and I hadn't really written much since then, and also I hadn't written much. I mean, it's different sort of writing, but I love, even in academia, I actually really loved writing. I had a lot of my fellow students, they hated it. Yeah. And I always enjoyed that aspect of things. I think when I started in 2014, not only was there a lot of just pent up creativity in a sense that I was using my brain in a way that I had not used it, well, possibly ever, but parts of it too with the writing I hadn't used for 14 years. But also at the time I was quite depressed, and this was another way for me to clear my head. And so I think I was sort of a workaholic when I first started, because it was a way for me not to think about things when I first started. So I was really quick when I first started. And I think that in some cases you can tell, because you also don't know to be careful about certain things, because I was a baby writer, and there are things that I perhaps would put more thought into now, but at the time I was just like blah, and then just wrote it all out. So I was super quick the first, particularly when the stakes were low. Yeah. When the stakes are low, it's a lot easier to be quick, because when you're not looking at a potential publisher, and when you're not worried about disappointing, readers, or disappointing your writing friends looking at this and being like, man, Olivia sucks.
We would never think that. We would never think that. Yeah.
But I mean, when there's no pressure, when it's just for like, let's see what I can do. Let's take my brain out for a spin and see what I can come up with. Yeah. It's a lot easier to be fast. My pace now is very much dependent on usually whether a story is in my head, like really ingrained in my head at that time, speaking to me at that time, and also my mental state. Yeah. I mean, when I'm struggling, it either goes really fast because I'm trying to avoid thinking, or it doesn't really go much at all. It could be deeply painful for me if I can't lose myself in the process. But if I am deeply engrossed in a story, my pace tends to be quite high. Not high, and like I'm not one of those 10,000 a day people. I would say if I got like 3,000 to 4,000 a day, I would think that was a great day. Like 3,000 would be good. 4,000 would be like amazing. And if I'm barreling right at the end of a book, right at the end of a book when all the threads are coming together, and I know precisely what has to happen, then, and also I'm just like, I'm done with this. I will go. I can get like 6,000 or 7,000 the last day or two.
When you're writing a lot, do you feel like you underwrite? Because that happens to me too, and then I often will look back at those last 3 chapters of the book, and I'll be like, "Ooh, these are a little spare." So like when I'm galloping, sometimes I feel like I underwrite a little, versus when I'm overthinking and it's really painful, I tend to overwrite. And when I'm going in to revise those chapters, I'm often pruning versus fleshing out.
Generally, they're pretty much, I would say, the same as the others. The only thing I do sometimes that I have to go back is when I'm reaching the end of a work day and I'm in the middle of dialogue where I have a sense of where they're going next, I will sometimes just say the words and go back later and enter in. But I do that the next day, enter in the expressions or emotional segments or internal monologue and things like that. I will just put in the words so I could get that down and then work out the rest later.
I actually almost always draft my chapters that way because I feel like my strength as a writer is dialogue, and so I often will go through and write the dialogue and scene just as like lines, like almost as like a script, and then the second pass to that scene is description and inner monologue and emotional beats and all that other stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, so I occasionally do that, but generally, it sounds terrible, but in a lot of cases, what I've written is pretty close to what it's going to be.
Yeah.
In the end.
I think you have great confidence as a writer and great sense of your own voice and what feels true to your voice, and I'm very jealous of that sometimes because I think I'm more diffident about it.
Well, I mean, but you actually can revise without like sulking in a corner.
Oh, there is sulking. There's a lot of sulking.
It has helped, as I've realized, that a lot of times what seems overwhelming can actually be fixed with the laparoscopic revisions. And that is a lot less overwhelming to me. But usually when I first get editorial notes from, it can be from a CP or a beta reader or from when I had a traditional publisher editor. Like I look at it and I'm like, woe is me. Like, the whole thing is terrible. Like it's going to take me years to do all this. And then I have to let it settle for a day or two. And then I look back and I'm like, well, that's not that bad. But my initial instinct is totally like to throw myself on a bed and like pout. I don't actually physically do it, but I will read it once and then I have to set it aside for a day or two till it feels less overwhelming to me. Yeah. That is my initial instinct. Yeah. That and like, just basically resenting that I have to do it, but I do, and it does make it better. Yeah. But I try to do as little as I can get away with. Because I would always rather write a new story.
We need to like swap half brains.
Exactly.
I need to get on that new story thing. And
So one question that most of these questions were about intersections between the two of us. These two are more specifically to us.
And so the first one is to you.
And I did not write this question. I want to be clear.
Okay, so I wrote the question. So your brand is romantic comedy, and this is something, and I think is true of all the stuff you've published, but also unpublished manuscripts of yours that I have read, is that what strikes me about the funny in your books is as bawdy as they can be, as funny and hilarious as they can be, they're always deeply kind. And the humor is always kind to the person telling it. It is not self-deprecating humor that is mean to the self, and it's never humor that punches down. Like they're always really kind. So, how do you walk that line with creating a humor that is never mean?
I thought about, when I saw this question, I think yesterday, I thought about this a bit, because I appreciate that. I'm glad, I mean, that makes me happy to hear that, because, I mean, that is partially my intent, even though I don't think I articulated it consciously to myself earlier in my career, but I have reached the point where that is my intent. My feelings, I think, are quite easily hurt. I don't have thick skin, and it's not that I blame other people for hurting my feelings. I blame myself, but that doesn't mean my feelings aren't hurt. Yeah. And so I don't want to, like my nightmare, and I'm sure I will do it, and I will feel terrible, and I will apologize and do better, or try my damnedest to do better, is I don't want to hurt people. Yeah. Because I've read so many things where with people being mean to each other, either in a humorous way or in a not humorous way, makes me so deeply uncomfortable, even as a reader, that when I'm writing, my writing is the things that I want as a reader.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there are several very popular books that I've had friends privately tell me, I don't think you will like this book because I think the humor is too, the humor is edging on too mean for you. So I think a lot of it is just writing something that I would want to read, and that will not hurt anyone, and also enough. It's about the self-deprecating part. I mean, I think, I'm the product of several years now of therapy, and I don't want to contribute to. I think many of us have enough negative thoughts in our head about ourselves that I don't want to contribute to that. I mean, not that my main characters are always super confident, but like, I don't think necessarily people's pain is funny. I mean, that's what I would say, is I don't find people's pain and their hurt funny. And also, I don't think I'm good at, when I see in a book someone says something that's insulting, it is hard for me, even if it's a funny insult, it's hard for me not to say, well, wouldn't that person be really hurt by that? And then whoever is the person who said that insulting thing is never, to me, a good love interest anymore. And I mean, I grew up with a certain amount of meanness in my household. I don't want to see that reflected on the page, because there are certain things that if my husband said to me, I would never be able to forget it, and he would not be my husband anymore. And so, like, I can't put that on the page if in real life I would be like, you're a dick, get out. Like, so I mean, to me, that's, does that even make sense?
Yes, no, I think it does. And I think it comes out of the empathy that you always have for your characters and building these really empathetic worlds. And I think I think that one of the things I like about romance is that it's a utopian genre. And that I think that is a very utopian impulse. And I think that's one of the things I really love about your books.
I mean, I think it can also be a weakness of mine, because you can say, people do say hurtful things. I've said hurtful things and been forgiven. And I mean, to be fair, like my husband, whatever, has said things inadvertently hurtful that I have forgiven. I guess it's when it's done with malice, or when it's done with carelessness, but then when you see you've hurt someone, then you have to try to, well, first apologize, but then do better. If it's a pattern, then no. I don't know, that's probably off the main point of it, but but thank you. That's a very kind thing to say.
And it's true.
Thank you. So the question I sort of came up with for Emma was that, it's a little blessed, but I've already talked about the many things I love about your writing. And again, you're in my one with Ruby as well, is that you love movies. Like, we both actually love older movies, because I've seen a lot of the same older movies that you have seen. But you watch more of them now than I do presently. And you watch all sorts of movies, and you discuss them on Twitter and on your blog and so forth. So what do you think movies, both older movies and new movies, can tell you, or like how does that influence your writing romance, but also what can it tell us about writing romance one way or the other?
I absolutely have an interest in film, and for a while that was going to be my focus in grad school. My focus was 19th century popular writing. This was not what I ended up focusing on, but I was really interested in movies visually, and was really interested in how they were different from books, and that they offer you all of this other modality that you don't have in a book. You have visuals, and you have sound effects, and you have editing. And one of the things that I love about film that helps me as a writer is that I think I am intellectual as a writer, in that I often am hearing dialogue, but I cannot see my story as a movie in my head. Whenever people say that, I'm always like, oh God, I'm so jealous. How do you do that?
I don't
Can
do that
develop
either.
that?
Yeah,
because it seems like that would be brilliant. Like,
it would be.
You have the visuals and you have all of the sound, not just the words of it, and that would be amazing. And so I do love movies, and like, watching something like I write a series, my friend Genevieve Turner, set during the space race, and you can watch a movie like First Man, which includes this dramatization of Neil Armstrong's, walk on the moon, and there are all the visuals, and that provides for me a thing that is never in my head. Like, never on my own do I have that visual. Or I have a whole, list, on my computer of bookmarked kissing scenes from movies that I really love. And when I go to write a kiss, sometimes, not that you're going to copy it, not that you're going to sit down and write it beat for beat, but you're like, write the inhale of breath. Aha, I forgot that. And you, go in and add that. And so I find them to be, a way to see tiny bits and pieces of my story or of something that I want to capture, and then to think about how is this represented in the film, and how I, in my own different way, am I going to represent this here. And I think movies are also can be a kickoff point for different books I've written. I've never written anything that is a reworking of My Fair Lady or something. But the book that Jen and I have been working on right now is in some ways has a Ninotchka-esque dimension to it. So Ninotchka, if you've not seen it, is an Ernest Lubitsch movie from 1939, and was one of the last movies Greta Garbo made, and was also probably the only true comedy that Greta Garbo made, in which she plays an agent of the Soviet Union who, along with two other Soviet envoys, have gone to Paris to try and sell some jewels that were confiscated during the revolution. And then she ends up falling in love with this kind of French playboy character. And it's a fantastic, opposites attract film. It's just a delightful movie in every way, but I love the vision of Garbo, wandering through Paris, and the sense that she makes out of it as the Soviet woman in a movie made in 1939 that was literally banned in the USSR because Stalin thought it was offensive. There's something about that that's very, I don't know, I find it endlessly entertaining. So anyhow, this book, in which the female main character is this Soviet, in some ways was kind of playing off this Ninotchka character and not copying it, but trying to capture the hilarity and the incongruity of the film, and then sort of take just that tension or that dynamic and set it in this kind of different place. So again, I love movies because of the visuals, because they do all these things that my imagination doesn't do, but then I love trying to play with them, trying to capture narrow little bits, emotional bits, or just little tiny things that I love about movies, and then set them kind of like Easter eggs in my books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes total sense.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Lightning round?
Lightning round.
Okay.
All right, here we go.
We're going to need to scroll down, I think.
Yes.
Sorry. Okay.
Okay. So, first lightning round question: pizza or tacos?
Tacos every day and twice on Sunday.
Probably depends on the pizza. Depends on the pizza. The thing is when I'm in, I'm living in Sweden now, is that the tacos make me weep, not in a good way, not with
tears of joy.
Glory.
Yeah.
But the pizza is also quite different from American pizza. It's terrible. I have low taste, but I lived out in the suburbs, relatively rural suburbs for a while, where there weren't artisanal pizza places. So Domino's or Pizza Hut, but I miss the sauce and the so
where are we going here? Pizza or tacos?
I can have it all.
Emma.
Okay,
okay, both.
I'm a modern woman. I do not have to choose. I can have it all.
I'm done with that.
Okay, tea or coffee?
Definitely tea. I hate coffee. I never drink it.
I turned a corner with coffee. I used to drink Diet Coke, was my source of caffeine. And then I moved to Sweden, where the Diet Coke in theory is the same, but it does not taste the same. And it's not, that glorious battery acid that I grew up in. I started drinking Diet Coke from when I was about, I think, 8 or 9. It's not like that. So I went caffeineless for a while, and that was not sustainable. So it occurred to me at some point that I really I love the smell of coffee, but it tasted disgusting to me. Yeah. I was like, it's so weird, because I like coffee ice cream. And I'm like, one day it occurred to me, you can make it taste like coffee ice cream if you add enough sugar and cream. Yeah. And so I did. I have 1 cup a day, and it is basically melted coffee ice cream, and it's delicious.
So coffee, but only if it's
But
heavily
only,
doctored.
I literally have cleared out, like, the Panera has the little sections where you can get all the stuff for your coffee.
Yeah.
And they have sugar packets. Like, I have cleared out. I left, like, one. And then I had to go to the other end of the store to go get more. Like, I put an insane amount of sugar in this one cup. It is 1 cup, and it's fine. And I put, like, real cream. I use, like, heavy cream in my coffee, and it is amazing.
There you go. I'll have to try it that way.
It is the highlight of my morning.
Okay.
It is the highlight of my morning.
I don't believe you that I could overcome coffee, but that's okay.
Do you like coffee ice cream?
No.
Well, then you're
I'm a lost cause.
You're screwed. Forget it.
Okay.
So Star Wars, Star Trek, or Spaceballs?
Star Wars, for sure.
Okay. I am not, like, hugely into any of them.
Why did you let me put the question on
Well,
then?
I would say the one Star Trek I did watch, and it was purely for shipping purposes, was when I was in college, Star Trek Voyager came out, and I was very into having a female captain. And I liked Deanna Troi, I think. And
Captain Janeway?
Yeah, Captain Janeway, but the Deanna Troi, and there was, like, a love thing with her and this blonde dude, and, like, I was into that, and I watched it purely for shipping purposes. I was an X-Files person.
Okay.
So I will say none of the above and enter in write-in X-Files.
Okay, fair enough.
That's what I was. Weirdest non-writing hobby?
Well, I'm not sure if it's the fact that I keep chickens or if it's the fact that I like to make jam, but it's one or the other.
Chickens.
I have 3 hens, which is a hobby that I adopted because of my critique partner, who has, like, way more poultry even than I do, and it kept going on and on about eggs and funny chicken stories, and I was like, I'm gonna get some of those, and now it's great, and I completely encourage anyone who would like to get hens. They're amazing, and it's like having small dinosaurs that live in your backyard.
That actually is a very good.
Yeah.
You should write ads for the chicken industry.
Chicken
You're
industry. I don't know that there's like a
small
big chicken.
dinosaurs in your backyard.
The noise they make when you open the egg box and they're nesting and they don't want to get up, it's like Jurassic Park out there. Like, it's crazy. The first time I heard this noise, I was like, I broke my chicken. Like, I slammed the egg box shut. I was like, oh, I've done something horribly wrong. And then because it does not
broke
sound,
my chicken.
It does not sound like a chicken noise.
Broke my
It's like straight out of the Triassic. Like, seriously.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So chickens. There you go.
Yeah. I have very few hobbies. I do. I mean, my most recent hobby, really, but it's not even that weird, is, like, reading fanfic.
For a show you never watched. That's the part
That is
makes
okay.
it
Yes,
weird.
that is for a show. Yes, I talked about this a little bit with Ruby, but yes, I did not watch Game of Thrones. I did not have HBO, but I am reading, like, hardcore Jamie Brand fanfic, like, obsessively right now. Yeah. The one that I'm reading right now is, I was telling Emma that a bunch of people recommended it, and I was like, well, why didn't I ever read this? Because I've been reading this stuff for months. And I looked, it was 260,000 words. And I am reading it now. And it is pretty amazing. But, like, my husband keeps asking me, he's like, are you done yet? I'm like, no. It's 260,000 words. What do you think? I'm going to be reading this for the rest of my life. Favorite objectively bad movie?
My favorite objectively bad movie is Face Off.
Okay.
With Nicolas Cage and John Travolta, and it's terrible. It's such a bad movie, and it makes no sense. And they're all deadly serious about it, and it is my favorite movie to get just a little bit drunk and watch Face Off, because it'll never not be funny because it's so bad and they're so serious. Yeah.
I love Dodgeball.
That's worse than Face Off.
A true underdog story. I just find it, like, genuinely hilarious.
ESPN
and it's
8
terrible.
is a thing my husband and I say all the time.
I know, the Ocho. It's like, that's a bold choice, Cotton. Or super Face Off for him. I just legitimately found it really funny, and I know, like, it's so hard to see, like, Lance Armstrong pop up now, whatever, as this, like, figure of shaming the main character, but, like, I just think there are so many lines that are just really, really funny in there.
That's a great choice.
But I do the that's a bold choice, God. We'll see if it pays off for him bit. I actually think a lot.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, you're watching the Ocho. So,
Oh, that's so funny.
so what have you not written that you want to?
Oh, okay. I wrote this question, and I'm still not really certain what the answer is. I want to write a book that's set in academics, and I don't know whether it will be a romance, because I don't know whether I think that's a place that's
Whether
helpful.
love can exist.
Or does it just kill your spirit? But at some point I'm going to write a book set at a university. I don't know whether that will be a book with a happy ending.
It seems
Yeah.
very
Very
metaphorical to me.
It's too literal,
I
actually.
don't know if it'll have a happy ending.
Not
She says,
metaphorical at all.
staring blankly.
We're gonna have to cut all the laughing out. That's the answer, I think.
I would say that there's a couple of books that I plan to write that there are certain sort of archetypes of male main characters that I am interested in writing.
Yeah.
That I think I probably will do sooner rather than later. One of them is a main character who at least pretends or maybe is very vain. Like and in this case, I do have a main character I do want to write who at least pretends to be extremely vain and kind of dim. And I kind of like people who are sort of playing with that and like I think there's a lot of room for that. I think I wanted to have a male main character who was also starchy, because the buttoned up sort of starchy male main characters I think are very interested. I actually
love that archetype.
I'm thinking I would love to write a book, or I was even thinking maybe at some point in the future, maybe an anthology with the title "He's Come Undone," which I thought would be perfect for that.
Yeah.
So that sort of archetype. Sorry. Hopefully there's not any. Hopefully there's not any private information being exchanged here. There we go. So, was there another type of? I think those were two of. Oh, and I want to write another fat hero. But I have written one in Cover Me, but I would want to write another one. But yeah, those are the ones I would say that I would like to write. So, what is a subgenre, setting, or trope you love but would never write? That you love but would never write? Because that's something I would never write that I don't love.
Yeah.
But
I love romantic mysteries, but I would never write one. I have no idea how people come up with red herrings and misdirection or bury their kind of Chekhov's guns, and I'm not nearly subtle enough or clever enough. I think I'm not interested in plot as a writer really at all, and so I don't think I could write a romantic mystery well. But I do love reading them.
Right.
Yeah.
I would not. I have not, and I don't think ever will write a historical romance. Despite the fact that my past is as a historian.
Yeah.
That is my training. I don't think. I've said this before. I think my anxiety is such. I'd be so worried about getting something wrong and getting it all right that I would never actually get to the writing.
Yeah.
It would be hard for me to forefront the relationship instead of making sure I had all the details correct. And the time periods that I know the most about, say it's just colonial America, there are a lot of aspects to that I think I wouldn't want to write anymore without addressing. You can't address colonial America without addressing slavery.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone wants to hear what I would have to say about that. Not that would have to be the point, but not that there aren't. No, I think no. I enjoy historical romance. If I were to write a historical, it would have to be like an alternative universe where I made up all the rules.
Yeah.
And I've thought about doing that. I've written a couple of futuristic romances, but I was thinking about having a planet that was like a faux Regency planet. But I could take out the stuff so that I didn't have to worry about getting details wrong. Yeah. Because it's my freaking world.
Yeah, it would be literally.
So I could have a little fun with some of the aspects of that sort of thing, but not have to worry about being right.
Yeah, I like that idea.
But that's the only way that would happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, favorite comfort reread?
Yeah, my favorite comfort reread is Susanna Kearsley's The Winter Sea, which is a book that has such a dark nadir. The point when all seems to be lost in that book is so dark. And the first time I read it, I honestly put it down and was like, have people lied to me? is this not a romance? Like, I thought I had been misled in some way, and that it was really like a women's fiction and it was not going to end happily, and then it does. And so, like, that, spoiler alert. And so that book, I just adore it because it does not seem like it can all be saved, and then it is. So that's my favorite comfort reread.
I think probably the book that I come back to most often in recent years. I mean, this changes over time because, again, I've been reading these for over 30 years. But is Joanna Bourne, probably The Black Hawk, is the one that I reread. I reread, and it's not like comfort, like, given the background of the heroine, she's, spoiler alert, like, former child prostitute, and like, there's a lot of tension, and, you know, she starts out the book, this is not a spoiler, it is the first scene of the book, like, she gets stabbed and almost dies, but, there's, because of the relationship that, in Bourne's previous books, you see you see a lot of their previous, at least along the edges of their previous relationship. Yeah. And by the time you meet them in the current book, and the book goes back and forth in time. Yeah. But it was never, I mean, it was antagonistic theoretically at the beginning, but never really. Yeah. And so the complications they have are never complications of wanting to hurt the other person or being, they're complications that are born of like deep love for one another, but differing loyalties. Yes. And a past that's really hard to, that is complicated enough that it'd be hard to move past. Yeah. And so it's, even though there's really grim things going on, the connection between them, I find, is very much my catnip. That he clearly, from the beginning, even though they've been apart for such a long time, and that they're older, which I appreciate too, but that clearly they've been devoted to each other without necessarily saying they're devoted to each other for decades. Yeah. Like since they were children. Yeah. And like that is like, it gets me right in my heart, and it's so beautifully written. There are passages in that just struck me right in my heart. Like she has a way of writing her own aphorisms. Yeah.
But you completely believe that they're aphorisms. Like, they are unique to her, but you utterly believe that people have been saying it for hundreds of years. Right. Raymond Chandler did the same thing, and I really think that Bourne and Chandler are the only writers who've ever been able to pull that off. Right. Yeah. That's a great choice. And I never thought of that as a book that's enemies to lovers, but it's not personal enemies. It's entirely about
external circumstances. Yes. Yeah. But personally, they never wanted the other person to be hurt. Yeah. I mean, and they're protective of one another from the beginning. And
even though they hurt one another deeply, they never want to.
Right. Yeah. And that they're both legitimately strong and capable. Like, there's competence.
So much competence from both of them.
And that's not just, you see them being competent. Yeah. Both of them. Yeah. And that she,
and that's what they love about each other. Right. I was going to give a line from the end.
No, isn't where he always wanted to go up and see she'd be doing something interesting.
Oh, I love that. Gorgeous.
I know, it's her at the end. Yeah. I love that line too.
I love it.
It's the same exact line. We haven't talked about this.
I'm going to go home and read that book again.
I know.
I read that one a lot.
We hadn't talked about that. So we both that same line. I read that line. I'm like,
yeah. It's so good.
My heart.
It's so specific to character, both him and her. Yeah. Love that book.
Okay. So what beloved underused? What's your most beloved underused romance setting or trope?
Mine is cross-class. And I think, and it was in Jen's piece, on Kirkus about how to fix the Ritas, and she had this line that was great, and it was, romance is often about money, but it's not often about class. And I was like, yes, it was such a beautiful articulation of something that I guess I had felt but had not been able to put it into words. And I think that particularly in American set romance, we often have billionaire heroes and heroines who are not as wealthy, even if they are middle class or something. But I don't think we're often addressing that cultural capital aspect of class in romance. We may be addressing wealth, but not that part. And so anyhow, I really love that. I would really love to see meaty cross-class portrayals. And if you have any to recommend, please tell me. And I haven't really written it, even though I love reading it, and I love when it's well done, but it's not something that I have actually done that much of. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what's yours? Underused setting or trope?
I think it was an excellent question. I think I would say this, is that when I started writing Teach Me, mm-hmm. I remember talking to you and saying, what other teacher, like really school set books, not where like the background is she's a preschool teacher and you see her like once in a classroom saying goodbye to the kids, but like something really deeply grounded in teaching, especially with both of them teachers, not a teacher-student.
Yes, which is, because I think for both of us, an absolute hard no.
No, I mean, and I get it, there are ways to deal with that, but I think mentally, having taught high school, but also having been a TA in college, there's a hard barrier in my mind between these are the kids. These are kids, and you don't sexualize them, and this is power dynamics that thou shalt not cross. Yeah. This, and I'm not criticizing people who have, but for me, it's a hard no on that. But so she was trying to think of any other ones where it was two teachers.
I can't, and I don't think I've ever read another romance. I don't think I've even read like a lit fic or something where they're both teachers and where there's so much school content.
But even like, maybe I need to read more Harlequin medical romance, but like things like with public service jobs. Yeah. Like really getting into public service jobs, like nurses and things like that where, I don't know, I mean, maybe I'm just not reading the right.
I've read that in historical, like Betty Neal's books are often.
Oh yes, well those are the
nurse doctors, right?
Yeah, there's that, and then he takes her in his...
Yes, and then there's those inscrutable kisses, and like she doesn't even realize he's pursuing her until like 80% of the way through the book. Yes.
I read so many of those growing up.
I remember I read Mary Stuart's when I was a kid, and not thinking of them as romance, and I did not understand what a plimsoll was for like the longest time. Mm-hmm. And I guess it's like a ked, it's like a tennis shoe. But I remember I was like, oh, this is so exotic. What's a plimsoll?
I remember getting from a thrift store. This is, I think, maybe one of the earliest romances I ever read. Mm-hmm. It was set in Australia. It was in Mills and Boon. It's called Nurse at Noonguala. And there were punishing kisses, I believe.
Oh, so many punishing kisses.
So many. It was very exotic to me. They're like, they're in Australia.
That's so funny.
So yeah, I would say more, I like stuff that really gets into different work. Like less used, like this, not just like, and I've done this sometimes too, like a generic work thing where it's just like a piece of the background that's not really explored. I really like exploring in depth work that is something people do on a daily basis that is particularly public service, serve oriented. That's part of the reason, again, I like your books so much, is because they have a lot of that. Hall pass celebrity.
Okay, so my hall pass celebrity, I have to preface this by saying, I very famously, all my real life friends would tell you this, I don't like hot men. Like, I just don't. And so my hall pass celebrity is Chris Thiele, who is a mandolin virtuoso. This is the most my answer. He's a mandolin virtuoso. And he won a MacArthur Genius Grant for playing the mandolin.
I thought you said Amanda Lynn virtuoso.
What is that? No, his
a mandolin.
So as you're listening to this, you should go to YouTube, and his last name is Thile, and there's a recording of him playing Bach Sonata No. 1 on the mandolin, which is written for violin. But I am telling you, it's like the hottest thing I've ever seen. And like particularly when he finishes playing the last movement, which is like this wild presto, like it almost feels like you shouldn't be watching it. Like it feels
intimate,
erotic. So Google Chris Thiele playing Bach Sonata No. 1 and you'll see what I mean.
I mean, I go through stages with this, and I mean, right now I am definitely obsessed with Nikolai Coster-Waldau. I mean, or as I don't know if I said this with Ruby too. I probably told you too. There's this one fanfic person with it who always refers to him as Nikolai Costco Walmart, which I kind of love. And yeah, I started saving pictures of him on my hard drive. I'd be like, oh my God, he looks handsome. So I'm like, okay, I'll save it for like, I have a file I call Hero Inspiration. So it's like, so I had Nikolai Coster Waldau, except I misspelled his name. Then I was like, came with the set. There was a second picture. I'm like, okay, Nikolai Coster Waldau too. I'm up to like Nikolai Coster Waldau 30. I think now. I mean, not even like previously that record I believe was set by John Cho, but I think for the moment he has surpassed John Cho. We might circle back to John Cho.
Yeah.
But those, that was
a solid choice.
Yeah, that was my choice. Most productive hours of the day for writing?
Mine is the hour or two before my kids get home. So, like, I teach at a university, and so I'm normally home by that point. And, like, I'll be like, okay, this is it. I have 90 minutes before the kids get home, and that's normally when I get most of my writing done. So, like, sort of mid-afternoon, late afternoon.
I'm morning. If I don't get writing going in the morning, it's very hard for me to get going in the afternoon. So, typically what I'll do is I'll get up, and my Swedish routine, it was different in the U.S., but my Swedish routine is I eat breakfast, I have my cup of hot melted coffee ice cream, and then I go upstairs to where I have a little office, and I like check on Twitter a little bit. Usually ends up being like an hour, but like I check on Twitter and my email, see if there's anything that needs to be addressed right away. And then usually at that point I really do need to get going if I'm going to get going for the day. And then usually somewhere around 2 or I'll stop for lunch. After lunch, it's often not this, I don't get quite as much done sometimes. And then usually around 2, 3, 4, like my brain is like waving a tiny white flag. I'm like, no, we're done. I sometimes can write in the afternoon, but it's better if I get going in the morning, which means I need to get enough sleep. The only time I have a good healthy sleep pattern is when I'm drafting. That is the only time I can get myself to go to bed early enough to get a good 8 hours of sleep at night.
Interesting. I wonder if it like tires you out in a different way that helps you like relax more.
My therapist would say it's because I value work more than I value my actual well-being.
Oh, that's
so
heartbreaking.
I know that I only do it when I know I need to do it for work.
Oh, that's heartbreaking. Oh,
I'm sorry. I think it's probably true, but it's good then when I'm drafting because I'm actually getting I usually get to bed at a decent time because I'm getting up because I know I can't go back to sleep in the morning or else I won't get words in.
Yeah.
What gets you in the mood to write?
I almost always have a song for like every book. And sometimes after that I will turn music off or switch to something that doesn't have lyrics, but there's usually like my segue song. And I have to be like really Pavlovian about it and be like, I cannot listen to that song like other times until it's like I'm going to sit down and write. So that it like triggers my, okay, you write words now, like thing. For a long time, because I was always writing papers around Christmas time, my Pavlovian writing music was the Charlie Brown Christmas, the Vince Guaraldi. And like I tell you, like those opening chords, like I hear them and my brain is like, you're going to write a seminar paper now, because for years that's what I was doing. And so that became like my writing music. I would listen to it all year round, but only when I needed to write. But now each book has like its own like theme song.
I've only had one book where I felt like there was a song that really, not necessarily inspired it, but sort of fit with it really neatly. It was the one I still need to revise, my Futuristic Gothic, which is the song Soundgarden, Burden in My Hand, where it starts out with what I think is one of the best opening lines in a song, which is "Follow me into the desert as thirsty as you are."
That's
which
perfect for that book.
I know, and it's very, I think, actually, unintentionally really is. But the rest of them, music does not actually do that for me. I have to be really excited about some aspect of the book. And so often what gets me to write in general is that there has to be something that
so it's intrinsic.
It's percolating in my head that I'm excited to write. Yeah. And on a daily basis, what inspires me to write is the hope that this will be one of the days where I will emerge 2-3 hours later and look up from the computer and there's stuff there that I think is like good work that I don't fully remember doing, but that it came from my brain.
Yeah.
And that for 2-3 hours, everything else was just gone.
Yeah.
And that, that's the hope. And also, after Desire in the Deep Blue Sea came out not long ago, and I got a couple DMs from people who said that, and the heroine is fat, and it talks about her in a bathing suit. And there's a woman on a bathing suit of the cover who is like, her hips and thighs are very generous. And a couple of people wrote me to say that it helped give them some bravery to go to put on a swimsuit and go to the public pool. And like,
that's awesome.
like I'm to tear up, but that made me very happy because one of my big things is like normalizing larger bodies, but normalizing bodies in general.
Yeah.
Like normalizing periods, which is something I did with the book that I just finished. Normalize the sex, the body, and sin.
Yep.
Normalizing the body.
Yeah.
Like bodies of all types. And so, and not, so that was, that was inspiring to me. Yeah. So, So, favorite curse word?
Which I think is our last question.
Yes.
Can I say the word? Do we know what we're going to do with this video? Should I euphemize the word?
No, we can always probably edit it out if we need to.
Okay.
I say that not knowing how that would work, but I'll ask my husband.
Okay. But my favorite curse word is definitely fuck, because it can be every part of speech except a pronoun. Like, it's just plastic in a way that I think other curse words are more limited. And so I would say that's definitely... I try not to curse as much on Twitter as I do in real life. So I think people who know me from social media are not exposed to the former Capitol Hill staffer's full vocabulary, which is florid. So that's definitely,
it's one thing I appreciate about you, actually. I do.
But that's definitely my favorite.
Like, at some point, my daughter is going to be so bitter because we do not swear, I do not swear in front of her. I don't even say, like, I don't use the word stupid. We say something is silly, or we say whatever. Like, and then, like, at some point, she's going to crack open one of my books and be like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Like, Mom, what?
I don't let my kids say the word fart because I really hate that word.
I say passing gas.
Yeah, I feel like fart is a way more vulgar word than fuck, which probably doesn't make sense to anyone else. But yeah, no, my kids are going to feel the same way. They're so upset. My daughter the other day was like, Mom, the S word is in that book. And I was like, oh shit. And she was like, oh, stupid is in the book.
You guessed the wrong S word.
And then I felt really bad. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's a bad one, too.
I would say that in the context of, like, daily life, that then fuck is probably it. In the context of my books of words that might be considered vulgar, I find when writing sex scenes that I find the word cock really invaluable because none of the other words for male genitalia, like, to me, sound the same. Like, I have used other words for it, but to me, the one that sounds, that doesn't sort of throw me out of the story a little bit, that is...
And just a little bit profane, but, like, in the way you want it to be, I think. Yeah. No, that's definitely my favorite one as well.
Right. So that one, I would say, would be...
Like that aspirated K on the end.
Yeah.
So it was the same thing with fuck, but yeah.
They're both glorious. Why should we choose? Like we said, we can have it all, Emma.
Indeed.
All the
Yes,
obscenities.
not an either or situation.
So, Emma had said this wouldn't take that long, but...
Wow, that was wrong. That was really wrong.
I'm sure it's mostly my fault.
No, never.
All right, but we'll figure out how to put this in manageable chunks and get this up somewhere.
I'm sure everyone wants to watch the full 90 minutes. Why would they not?
Who wouldn't? Yes. We're so charming.
We are. Well, if you've hung with us this long, thank you.
Yes. Take care.
Bye, guys.
All right, bye.